Good morning, everyone. Good morning, YouTube. Good morning, Trade Pros. Good morning, Lee, on YouTube, and everyone. Angela, how are you guys doing? Everyone in the trade room. Hope everyone's doing well on this Monday morning. And let us get ready for this morning market update and the start of the week, as we've got a larger week ahead in terms of earnings. So we got a lot of earnings this week. We don't have much of high impact news coming through, but what we'll see is earnings roll through a bunch of big names that we are all familiar with. Overnight, we had a slight little drop, I believe, into the early morning session, and we're getting a decent recovery right now on the S&P, NASDAQ, and other equity futures. We got a pop in the Shanghai that popped up about 3%. And we saw the S&P drop under 3,200 just temporarily, but rallied ever since. We're up about 25 points from that low of the overnight session. And we're coming into that previous day high at the 32.25s. So we're just about 10 points away. So we got a pretty strong pop in the equities here this morning, early in the morning, as last week we had quite the range form in this equity market. Now, in earnings news, we're set to kick off high gear this week. We've got some Q2 results out of Microsoft, out of Tesla, out of Intel, and American Airlines. So this is all around COVID cases that continue to rise at an alarming rate. And we got some hot spots that are flaring up in the country's south and west through New York City. Sorry, not through New York City. While New York City is actually entering its final phase for reopening, as we can see, some sports are restarting without fans. They're unlocking doors to gardens and zoos, but we can see that gyms and museums and indoor dining will not open up. So in more COVID news, we got some vaccine players that are to be watched this morning as they enter phase 1 trial results of AstraZeneca's COVID-19 vaccine developed in the University of Oxford, which is set to be published in The Lancet. So reports last week gave us the potential suggestion that we are going to see some positive news out of this vaccine. So the vaccine is believed to be one of the most advanced stages of clinical trials, with about or over somewhere in the area of 9,000 patients in both Brazil and South Africa. So overnight, the UK also secured early access to about 90 million doses of vaccines in development by drug makers, including Pfizer, BioNTech, and Valneva. So while GlaxoSmithKline developed a deal with CureVac to develop Moderna-based vaccines and antibodies. So in just about 6 months throughout this COVID outbreak, 140 vaccine candidates are in the preclinical trial stages, and 23 of those have actually entered the clinical evaluation stage, according to the WHO. So to continue with this COVID, look who it is, Mr. Mark, just Wolfson. So to continue with this COVID aid, the next round of COVID aid, we can see that Congress begins debating a 5th COVID-19 aid package today, as several of the states in the country's south and west re-implement the lockdown to curb some of these virus measures. So Democrats want to continue enhancing unemployment payments throughout January, while the Republicans are on the other side and criticize providing that much aid will run about $15 billion a week, arguing that it actually discourages people from returning to work, as they will actually be getting paid more. We've seen on average $22, $23 an hour being paid out to those who are receiving this aid, and to a lot of people that is much more than they're actually making. So in other COVID news, President Trump has also suggested that he will not sign a bill without a payroll tax cut, but has backed a new round of stimulus payments for Americans. So we'll see how that goes. There's a lot of ultimatums here when it comes to the new COVID aid, but it seems like there is no alternative. Additional spending will worsen the balance sheet of governments, but it's actually necessary to prevent everything from getting even worse, says Sean Roche, chief economist for Asia Pacific and S&P Global Ratings. So he also says we're seeing some fiscal policymakers think about pulling back some of their measures or maybe letting them expire without renewing them. And that's quite dangerous. That's a quite dangerous thing to do when demand in the rest of the economy still remains quite suppressed. He also says we hope to see some of those fiscal measures being renewed pushed forward into the next year. That is going to mean more fiscal easing, but at the moment there's no alternative. So it seems like propping up the market is the only alternative, and we'll see that the Fed may continuously provide more stimulus, as we could potentially see the Fed shift from bond buying to real equity buying. So no longer buying, well, continuously buying ETFs, but we could also see them actually start trickling into actually more equity-based assets, right? So the plan the plan set is about $1 trillion, which is a lot lower than the $3.5 trillion proposed by the Democrats. When we go over to the EU, we talked about negotiations of the EU's 750 billion euro coronavirus stimulus package plan, and it appears to be making some headway after 3 days of deadlock. So the leaders of the Frugal Four, as we talked about last week, Netherlands, Sweden, Denmark, and Austria, say that they're now ready to accept just under 400 billion euros in grants, with talks still ongoing on the other elements of the package. So failure to come together would raise some serious questions about the continued viability of the bloc, and officials and experts say that with summits being framed as a make-or-break moment for nearly 7 years of European integration. So there are also more regional action today as latest talks kick off to define Britain's post-Brexit relationship with the EU. However, in tech news, as we start to see earnings roll out, we've seen Walt Disney, which is Facebook's largest advertiser, so has also slashed its Facebook advertisement spendings, quoting, "People familiar with the situation." Now, this is the latest setback for Facebook as it faces a boycott from companies upset with the handling of hate speech and divisive content. So according to a research firm, was it Pathmatics? Disney was Facebook's top U.S. advertiser for the first 6 months of 2020, spending just over $200 million on Facebook ads for Disney Plus in the U.S. So Disney also halted advertising Hulu on Instagram, owned by Facebook. Hulu spent $16 million on Instagram from April to June this year. And civil rights groups have targeted Facebook, saying it hasn't made enough progress enforcing its policies on hate speech and misinformation. So we'll see what happens with Facebook on the morning after that news, and we'll see what happens with a lot of these earnings reports and equities markets today. We've seen a slight little pop. We're above the pivot point here as we get ready to jump in the room and identify their next best trades on the day. We have some interesting comments here, but we'll have to see what happens throughout the week. I'll tell you guys how much volume was traded on the S&P 500 this morning, which will give us some kind of indication on how the day may go. So we've got just under 290,000 contracts, which is pretty weak this morning. We're about 17 minutes into the open. We need to see those numbers pop by about 70, 80,000 contracts traded for us to have any interest in potential volatility for this market. Now, the S&P has rallied just a bit, and we'll see if we continue this bullish sentiment throughout the day. We start popping some of these key levels like 32.30, 32.25. I think we're going to see a nice little bull run to close, but we've got a lot of potential sell stops under that 31.90. With that being said, we're going to jump in the room and do some more analysis here on oil and other equities, and we'll see everyone on YouTube tomorrow. Take care, everyone. Cheers.